Hi, today I'll be trying to code something inspired by this card, and to be completely honest, I'm not really looking forward to it. This is because it's not something I can generate in a mathematical, logical way. It's more on the artistic side, and that's something I'm completely useless with, and it always takes me a lot of time. I'm a tech, not an artist, and it's a lot easier to love the things you know you can be pretty good at, like maths or physics, and dread the things you know you'll never get right, like pretty much anything that requires having any kind of artistic sense. But I'll be giving it a try anyway, and we'll see what happens. So yeah, let's get started. We're going to start with a div. This is going to be our card, and within it we're going to have a slider. So that's going to be input type range, range, not rage, even though range inputs do often fill me up with rage. So this class is going to be card, and within a style attribute we'll be setting the value of the range input. Now by default the minimum of a range input is 0, its maximum is 100, and its value is dead in the middle, so that's at 50. So that's the value we'll be setting here, 50. Okay, now we can get here and just reset the styles on the range input. So type range, don't write rage again. Okay, now reset those styles, and let's make the card visible. So we'll be giving it some dummy dimensions. So width and a height, we'll be tweaking these a bit later, but for now, box shadow, just so that we can see the boundaries. Okay, so it looks something like this. Let's also set a ridiculously high border radius. So we have that. Now for layout, we're going to set on the body and div elements display grid. And you see that the runes are rounded corners, and that's because when we set display grid on the card, which is a div, then what's inside occupies all available space. So that's the range input, and of course the edges don't really align because we have a tiny margin around our slider. But if we set margin 0, so like a sort of a basic reset on everything, you see that the edges of the card now align with the edges of the slider. And of course we can hide those corners with overflow hidden, right? And we can bring the border radius to something more decent, and let's also put everything in the middle. So place self, center, and this is only going to work horizontally, and that's because the height of the body is at this point given by the height of its content, which is the card. So let's fix that and explicitly set a height on the body. That's the full viewport height. Okay, so now it works. And one thing that bugs me is that the width and height can get really super small, and they can go down to 0 eventually, and we don't really want that. So let's say we're going to have a card value, I don't know, something like this, and then we're going to have a second one, so a second card value, and this one is going to be unitless. So here we'll be using a maximum, so a maximum between the first card value, right? So okay, I can't use a keyboard. So here we're going to have the second card value multiplied with one viewport width unit. Okay, and then we're going to have something very similar for the height. So okay, viewport height. Okay, so this should pretty much do it. And now let's collapse all this stuff, the body, the card, and let's focus on styling our range input. So we're going to have a track mixin, so mixin track, border none. Make sure, so we're going to make its width inherit and its height the same, and give it a background that's going to be that image we have up there. And of course, nothing is going to show up until we call this mixin. But first, before we do that, let's also create a thumb mixin. So this one, so thumb, and for the background, let's say it's going to be something like purple. We'll tweak it later. And let's also set a thumb width. Okay, so we're going to actually use that one for the width because we don't want it to cover the entire track, right? Now here we're going to need to call the track mixin. So include track. Now create a version for Firefox, and this becomes range, and we don't need a runnable part. Okay, now for the thumb, let's just replace all occurrences of track with thumb here. Okay, and of course we're not going to need that runnable part. Okay, so now we have that. We also have those focus lines. If you see those black lines, see when it's not focused, they don't show up anymore. So let's get rid of them, and we're going to handle focus in a better way in a little while. So okay, so having done this, let's move back here, and for the image, let's place it in the middle. So 50%. The second one is going to be by default 50%, and let's give it a background size of cover. Okay, much better here. So now that we've done this, let's also set a nicer background on the body, and we're going to want to have that slight 3D rotation. So we're going to also set a perspective. So perspective 35 ems, and background, we're going to want a dark gray. So something like that. Okay, now we can just collapse that part. Okay, so something else we can do is set a second layer here. So we're going to have a linear gradient, and this one is going to go 90 degrees, so towards 3 o'clock. That's going to be transparent and white. And we're going to want to have a sharp transition between them. So basically this is going to be at 0, and here we're going to have a stop position, P. And this one is going to depend on the K value. So that's the value of our range input. So this is going to be calc K times 1%. So K goes from 0 to 100, and the percentage, this position value P, goes from 0% to 100%. The thing is, when we drag this, this doesn't change that position, and that's because K doesn't get updated. So let's fix that from the JS. So we're going to get our card, and this one is going to be document query selector card. Okay, then we're going to have add event listener, and for input we're going to, okay, so for our card, yeah, no cats, style set property, this one's going to be K, and event target value. So now it should work. Oh, I messed up something there. Okay, that's weird. Card style. What's the problem? How come we don't have two arguments? I just don't see it. Okay, it works. I have no idea why it didn't work before. Refresh, I guess. Should work now. Yeah, no error anymore. That was weird. Okay, so let's get back here, and we obviously don't want to cover that part with white. We're going to blend these two layers, and when we blend a layer and one of them is white, then the result of blending is going to be the other layer inverted if you use a difference or exclusion blend mode. So that's going to be background blend mode, exclusion. Okay, so this should do it. You can see it now. And it seems like it's working fine, but if we make the thumb a bit fancier, you are going to see that doesn't quite work properly. So let's say we're going to have a thumb color. Okay, so this is one is going to be white, let's say, and let's say we're going to have a linear gradient, and it's going to go from that thumb color to transparent to that thumb color again. And I think you can start seeing the problem now. So the midline of the thumb doesn't coincide with the change in the gradient, with that gradient position where we change from transparent to white. So the midline of the thumb goes between half a thumb from 0%, so that's half thumb here, all the way up to 100% minus half a thumb. So the range of motion is 100% minus half here and half here, a full thumb, and it starts from half a thumb. So this means we need to recompute that position. So it's going to get multiplied with a range that's 100% minus the thumb width. Okay, and we're going to divide this by 100, because 100 is the maximum value the range can take, minus the minimum value that range can take. So 100 minus 0 is 100. Okay, so here you can see it coincides with the start of the thumb. So we need to shift it by half a thumb width. Okay, so you can see it there. Everything underneath the thumb gets inverted. Okay, so let's just compute that. So we're going to have a thumb radius which is half the thumb width. And in case you're wondering why I'm calling it a radius, it's because it's the radius of that circle you see there in the middle, right? So let's get back here. So we're going to use that thumb radius. We're just going to add it to the position. Of course, we need to interpolate. And now it should all work fine. You can see that the midline of the thumb always coincides with the separation line between transparent and white in that layer, or between the uninverted image and the inverted one. Okay, now let's get back to making the thumb fancier. And let's collapse everything else in the meanwhile. Okay, we're also going to set here a thumb line. So this is going to be basically the width of this thin vertical line and the width of the circle line. Okay, so having done this, we're going to have a second gradient. Actually, just make it a radial gradient. This one is going to go from, is going to be a circle, and it's going to go transparent, thumb color, transparent again. Okay, and we're going to want to set some positions for these things. Okay, so those, we're going to have sharp transitions there, so those are going to be 0 there, and here we're going to go all the way up to the thumb radius. Okay, and the size of this one's going to be in the middle horizontally, and its horizontal size is going to be a thumb line, and we don't want any background to repeat, so we're going to want background repeat, no repeat. So you can now see that sort of ring there, and you can see the line, okay? And we want this line to stop where the circle stops. So that's basically 50% minus the radius. So that's going to be calc 50% minus the thumb radius. And actually, if we want to go to the middle of the line, the middle of the circle line, then we can add half a thumb line, and that's less likely to fail and have tiny little rendering issues there. So here the second one is going to be 50% plus a thumb radius, because it's going to resume, the line is going to be transparent up to there, then it's going to resume from 50% plus the thumb radius and minus half that line. And you can see it now because it stops there and it resumes there. Now here we're going to have a calc, and this one is going to be, first up is going to be the thumb radius minus the thumb line, minus 1 pixel, and this is because Chrome has some rendering issues, so yeah, we need to kind of try to go around things. And let's just paste this twice, and here we're not going to have that minus 1 pixel because we want to have a 1 pixel difference, so we have a smooth circle line and not have jagged edges. And here we're not going to have that thumb line, right? It's just going to be minus 1 pixel. Okay, so something like this. Okay, so you can see it now. Let's also set a filter here, so filter, drop shadow, so that we have a bit more contrast outside and it pops. So 2 pixels, 2 pixels, 3 pixels, and biggest contrast between white is with black. Okay, so you can see it's quite a difference now. It's way more obvious, makes that white pop, having that black shadow around it. Okay, so you see, having the black shadow around makes that white pop out. Okay, now next step is we're going to have a conic gradient to create the arrows. So conic gradient, and let's actually have a size for our arrows. Oh, yeah, we don't even have autocomplete for that. So arrow size, so basically we want this to be less than half. Okay, we want it to be less than half the inner circle, so let's say it's going to be 35.5%, something like that. And an arrow angle, let's say 60 degrees. Okay, so now we're going to want to start from, so the default start for a conic gradient is 12 o'clock. If we have from 90 degrees, we move to 3 o'clock, and we want to go by half the arrow angle before that, so minus half the arrow angle, and then we're going to have the thumb color and the arrow angle in full. Then we're going to have transparent 0%, and we want to reduce the size, and we want to attach this to the middle vertically and to the start horizontally. So that's going to be 0, and if you don't set a second value, the vertical one, that's going to be by default 50%. And then we're going to have the arrow size, and if you don't set the second one, it's going to be by default 100%, but it doesn't really matter because we position stuff in the middle anyway. Okay, so you can see there, so for example, if we did this 27, it's going to be like smaller. If we had it 47, it would be way bigger. You can see that. Okay, so, and for this, if we had, for example, 80 degrees, it would be wider. We can have, for example, something like 120, and it would look like this. Or we could have something like 30, and it would look like this, really, really narrow there. So let's just leave it at 60. Okay, and since we're going to have a second conic gradient with the exact same list of stops, we're just going to take this and use a custom property there. Okay, so list, and of course we're going to need to interpolate this stuff. So otherwise it's not going to work. Then take this and paste it, and we're going to have a second one, and this one is going to get attached to 100%, right? And it's going to start from minus 90 degrees. Okay, so it kind of looks like that, and that's pretty much all. One more thing I want to add here. So we're going to have cursor, east-west resize. For some reason autocomplete doesn't work. Okay, now I think we can collapse this, and we're done with the thumb, we're done with the track. One more thing here, so let's say cursor pointer. Okay, now the next step would be to get that 3D motion effect, and also I promised a nicer focus effect. So first off, we're going to have a highlight, and this is going to be a highlight switch. Initially it's 0, and then if we have hover or focus within, for which we don't even have autocomplete, I hope I spelled that right, we're going to switch this highlight value to 1. And here something we can do is filter sepia calc 1 minus highlight. So if it's not hovered and the range input is not focused, then we have 1 minus 0, so that's 1, so that's a full sepia effect. But if we have a hover or we focus the range input, then the highlight is 1 and 1 minus 1 is 0, so we have no sepia effect. Okay, we can set a transition here, so a transition duration. So let's say something like this. So transition, and transition property, we're going to want to transition the transform as well, so transform and filter as well. Okay, so having done this, you can see it changes smoothly. Let's move on to the JS and take care of that motion, slight rotation on hover. So we're going to have a rectangle here, and we're going to have a function set rectangle, and that's all we'll be doing inside. So this rectangle is going to be set to the card get bounding client. Okay, so we have this, and we're going to take this function, but first actually we're just going to copy paste this, and actually copy paste this twice. So first time this is going to be a resize, and what we'll be using is the set rectangle function. Okay, so use that here, and also we want to call it here initially because we want to set that. Okay, and now here we'll be setting on mouse move a different custom property. So this one is going to be an I, and this one is going to be a client X minus the rectangle's left over the rectangle width. Okay, and this gives us a value that goes between 0 and 1, and we want to shift the interval between minus 0.5 and 0.5, so we subtract 0.5. And something else, we don't want a ton of decimals. Okay, We don't want to send a ton of decimals, so we're going to do something like this. To fixed 2 decimals. This should be more than enough. Okay, now we're going to have something very similar. This one's going to be a J, and this one is going to be Y, top, and height. And we are done with the JS. So yeah. Now let's move here, and on hover, we are also going to have something a bit different. So that's going to be transform, rotate, and it's going to be a calc value, and it's going to be rotate X, and we're going to use the J here, times 10 degrees. Actually, let's make this a card angle. So card angle, and of course let's set that here. Um, 10 degrees, I guess we can set it to. Okay, so now we have that, and let's add a second rotation. This one is going to be rotate Y. Okay, that's going to use the I, and because this goes, so the y-axis goes down, but we want the direction we'd have if it pointed up, so we need to use a minus there. Okay, so this should do it. Oh yes, this is nice, look at it. And this then okay. Now something else we're going to want is to have those labels. Now let's collapse that hover, and we're going to get those labels with pseudo elements. So before and after. Okay, so we're going to have a switch, and this is going to be initially 0, and content is going to be before, and then we're going to take all of this and change things on the after. So this switch value is going to be 1, the content is going to be after. Okay, so next step is going to be, we're going to want these to be in a grid area, first row, and the column is going to be determined by that Q switch. So it's going to be 1 plus the Q switch. Okay, then we're going to have, for the range input, we're going to have grid area, first row, first column, it's going to span a single row, it's going to span 2 columns. Okay, now one more thing I want to show you. So if, yeah, you can't see the before and after. Well, you can see the after, but you can't see the before, and that's because it's underneath the range. So let's set z index. Okay, so now we can see them. Let's also give them a background. So background, something like that. And now you can see that they cover absolutely everything. So let's fix that. Align self start. And we don't like how they're distributed horizontally, because we want the before is right at the start where we wanted it, but the after is there, you know, and they both basically stretch, because if we have box shadow 0, 0, 3 pixels green, for example, you are going to see how they stretch out. You can see those are the limits. So what we really want is to introduce a space in between them so they're pushed to the edges. So we're going to have here justify content, space between, right? We want to have a space between those. Okay, something else we want to set is pointer events none. Okay, and let's do something in terms of the text. Let's do something for the font, and it's going to be a thin font, 1M, 1.5 line height. Okay, so it should look like something nice. Okay, let's also set a margin here, so margin 0.5 mm. Oh, okay, let's also set a padding. Let's also set a border radius. Let's make it identical to the padding. Okay. Let's also set filter invert, and here we're going to use that Q switch. And of course this is a Sass and CSS conflict, and I wrote an article about that. I'll be linking it in the description, you can check it out. Okay, so it's starting to look like something. We only want them to show when we hover this whole thing. Okay, so when the highlight is on. So opacity, highlight. Oh, okay. Now there are a few tiny things that I still don't like. So for example, I can only drag this thumb so far, and that's because the thumb of range input by default moves within the limits of the content box of the track in WebKit browsers, and within the limits of the content box of the input in Firefox. And that's why I typically don't set any margin, border or padding on the track, so that its content box coincides to that of the actual input, and we get the exact same result in both WebKit browser and in Firefox. Okay, so we can't change the way that range inputs work, but we can make the range input extend outside of the card by half a thumb width in this on this here beyond this edge, and by half a thumb width beyond this other edge. Okay, so that's going to be modifying the width. So width, this is going to be calc 100% plus half plus half gives us a whole, so thumb width. And we also want to set place self, justify self center, because we want the align to still stay stretch, the default. Okay, this looks better. Now something else, we like the before to disappear when we get close to it. So let's say we're going to have a threshold value for K. So let's say that's going to be a limit, label limit or something. Let's say it's going to be 15. So when K is under 15, we want that before to disappear, even though we're hovering the card, we're dragging this thing. Okay, so we're going to compute a difference in the lower side. So difference inferior, whatever, and this one is going to be like a clamp, because we want to limit the value between 0 and 1. So these are going to be the ends, and the middle value is going to be a calc, and this one is going to be K minus that label limit. Okay, so now that we've done this, we're going to do something similar for the after. So it's going to be at the other end, so difference superior, and here we're going to have that it's basically 100 minus that threshold value minus K. Okay, so having done this, here this opacity on the before and after, we're going to modify this, and it's going to be basically a calc. So let's say we're going to compute not Q, so this is calc 1 minus Q. So here we're going to multiply with, and within parentheses we're going to have not Q. This is going to be for the before, so difference. Okay, and then we're going to add, so the stuff for the after, so this is going to be Q times the other difference. Okay, so let's format this nicely. Okay, something like this. So now when we drag it, you can see. Okay, something else. We're going to have transition, opacity, and that's transition duration. Okay, so okay, it slowly appears and disappears, so that's good. Okay, now having done this, I think this is pretty much it. Let's see. So let's say we're going to have something like that. Looks pretty good to me. Yeah. So yeah, I'll stop toying with it and I'll just leave it alone. I think this is pretty much what I wanted to show you for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you like the work that I'm putting out for almost 9 years now, please consider supporting it so I can continue doing more in the future. You can do so by being a cool cat and becoming a patron on Patreon. The link is going to be in the description, as well as links to other resources. Or you can get me something off my Amazon wishlist. Again, the links are going to be in the description. Or you can at least share this to show the world what can be done with CSS these days, because honestly, I think it's pretty damn cool. In any event, thanks for watching, and until next time, bye!